And we're good. We're good.
Hello and good morning. Welcome to the National BIM for Infrastructure webinar. Today, we're going to be looking at designer perspectives, digital delivery projects with models of legal document. This event is sponsored by HEEP, Highway Engineering Exchange Program, Building Smart, and TRB AED 80 per N1. Before we get started today, there's a couple of things I need to go over, some housekeeping, but even before the housekeeping, I wanted to just let everyone know that these webinars take a significant amount of planning in the background and getting things together, and I just want to give a special thanks to those that have helped out. Will Sharp, Sandra Larson, Michael Kennerly, Annette Jeffers, Lance Parvey, John Wilkerson, Alexa Mitchell, Ben Jilk, Randy Robinson, and Ian Howell. And we've also had some input from the HEEP organization, from Elaine Richard and Vern Danforth. So thank you guys, really appreciate that. Randy, you want to advance the slide? So today we will be recording this call, and it will be available on the HEEP website for future use. It's kind of a different platform, and so you're probably showing as anonymous, but don't worry about it. That's just how the Teams Live system logs you in. You can either type your name in the Q&A or just stay as anonymous if you choose to ask some questions. And if you're having issues with audio, the likelihood is that it's on your side and that you just need to go into your system and make sure that your volume is not muted or at zero. And so you just need to change the settings on your computer sound. Next slide, Randy. So this is probably what you're seeing or something similar. Up in the top right-hand corner, there's a Q&A icon. And when you click that, it brings up, you can see that box on the right side. And you click on the Ask a Question button after you enter your comments in that box. Also, being that this is a live event, if you happen to leave and you want to come back, there's a scroll bar at the bottom, and you can kind of go back and forth on the event and look at that. So since it's live, you can still rewind or skip to the live spot if you've left. Next slide, Randy. So let me just give you a quick interview for today. This is actually the 5th in the series, and we're looking at opportunities and challenges that are presented by this shift to digital twins and digital delivery. And we're going throughout the project lifecycle. I've kind of done it in a little bit of an order, starting with the easy stuff. We're starting to get into the more interesting information from perspective of the actual consultant use and the digital delivery and digital twins. But today we're going to be focusing on the designer perspective and mostly consultant designers and their experience with the model as a legal document from 3 different states. Next slide. So for today, we'll start with an introductory plenary session, and that will be a national perspective for BIM in the transportation industry. After that session, we will move on to designer perspectives, and we've got 4 designers who are going to give a short presentation each on their experience with projects where they've used digital delivery with the model as a legal document. And then we'll move to a panel discussion with those 4 consultants and talk about some of the details with their projects and some of the challenges and successes that they've had with that. And then we'll wrap it up at the end and go from there. Next slide, Randy. So for the national perspective today, we're going to start with an introduction with Vern Danforth from HEEP, and he's going to talk a little bit about the HEEP conference in 2022 in Florida. Is the HEEP president this year and works for the Florida DOT. Following Vern will be Ian Howell. He's the interim CEO for Building Smart International, and he's going to talk about the 2022 Annual Open Standards Conference in Anaheim next week. Following him, Mike Busselman was going to talk about the AASHTO Joint Committee on Data Standardization from Montana DOT, but there's been some challenges with traveling, and he may or may not be on, but right now we're expecting Will Sharp to step in for him. If he happens to come on in the next 10 minutes, Mike will do that presentation. After that, we'll have Jim Haber from Iowa DOT, and you know what? I asked him how to pronounce his name, and I think I just butchered it, so I apologize, Jim. But he's going to talk a little bit about the BIM for Bridges and Structured Pooled Fund study, and following him, again, we had some challenges, so we were going to have Cindy Hoagland from ARTBA, but in her stead will be Brian McGinnis from Trimble, and they're going to have an ARTBA update for us. And then to wrap it up in this first section, we'll have Will Sharp, who's a senior VP for HDR, giving an ACEC update. So with that, Vern, why don't you take it away and tell us about HEEP in Florida.
All right. Yes, thank you, George. I was asked to go ahead and describe a little bit about what we've got planned for the conference so far. So Randy, if you want to move forward. I think our first slide here is we do have an active website. You can go out to it. There's a QR code right there, but if you go to the heep.org, there's also a link to it, and you'll see the page on the left. The page there on the right are some of the, I guess, the local sites that you'll see in the area if you do register and come to the conference. I think we're at about 115 people registered for the conference. We hope to get up to the mid 300s by the time we actually deliver the conference in September. It will be in late September, so it'll be a little cooler in Florida, not as hot as it typically is, but we're looking forward to having it. We're really excited. I want to go to the next slide, and I'll get into a few more of the details. So this is the venue. As you see there on our logo, we had planned this for 2020. There was a pandemic that kind of got in the way. We rescheduled it for 2022 at the same location. A few of you have been down there and recognized the facility. It's a beautiful facility. It's all self-contained, easy to get to. There'll be lots of water to see, lots of, when you're outside of the event room, it's a beautiful place to go to and visit. So in the Fort Myers area, which is, in the southwest, the Gulf Coast side of Florida, it's pretty easy to get to from the airport and whatnot. And then once we get out there in this conference site, you kind of feel like you're on vacation, but we'll be on vacation talking about HEEP and BIM topics for sure. Our agenda is breaking, we're starting to develop our agenda with these session topics having to do with things that we do on a daily basis. And of course, with as many, I think right now we're up to at least 15 different DOTs that are going to be represented. And we will be talking about how we're implementing a lot of these things across the board. There are 72 breakout sessions planned. We've got about 10 roundtable discussions. The roundtable discussions are where we just do that. All the DOTs get together and we talk about a specific topic, whether it's CAD or it's BIM delivery or it's contracting BIMs, whatnot. We will have plenty of discussions for people to engage with one another and find out what we're all doing. Of course, we'll also have FHWA and AASHTO updates as part of the general session. We also have a student competition where we really encourage local universities from Florida. In this case, this year it'll be Florida, Utah, and Iowa to present on a topic. Maybe it's a research project that they're doing for their master's degree or something like that. We also have an international student that will be selected from our Area 5 meeting, and so they'll all compete for a prize cash cash prizes, so it's always good to support the student competition. We also have an awards banquet the last night before the final day's sessions, where we give out a few awards and talk about the next conference and whatnot. So that's part of what our typical agenda usually is. Next slide. So obviously I have to shout out to our sponsors. We're pretty much full, almost full with sponsorship. We're, I think, breaking the record as far as the number of people that want to come and sponsor. That just shows the interest of how HEEP is growing and the interest in with all the different vendors and partners that we have. Of course, we have premium, diamond, different levels of sponsorship. There is a note here, HDR is a diamond sponsor. I want to make sure that I get that noted. It didn't make it to this slide. But this is the main breakout where we'll be having the general session and you know, the lunches and whatnot, breakfasts, that type of thing. Next slide. Some of the things in the area, there's a fantastic guest program that if you're not attending the conference and want to bring a guest, Sanibel Island is just across the bay there. It's beautiful. There's lots of little boutique shoppings. There's a National Shell Museum. There's a sanctuary. There's also this Key West Express. If you're in the area and you want to take a ride down to Key West from Fort Myers Beach, it's about a 2-hour ride. It's a round trip transportation. It's another thing that you can do in the area. Next slide. I think I had a few more images. There's the wildlife refuge. It's a national wildlife refuge. It's pretty much half the island of Sanibel is a wildlife refuge. We're also planning just an excursion out to the Edison and Ford Winter Estates Museum. And there's a couple of walkthroughs that you can see. I think that's on Thursday afternoon. But it's really a beautiful area. If you've never been there, it's something you definitely want to go visit. And that may be my last slide, is it, Randy? Yes, so that's all I've got. Thanks, Randy. Thanks, George. Carry on.
All right, Ian, you're up.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to introduce you to an Open Standards conference that's happening in Anaheim, California next week. Randy, if you could hit the next slide for us. It's the first annual Open BIM USA event being held in conjunction with Digital Built Week in California. Next slide, please. We have a terrific agenda, and whilst this is next week and it may be too late for you to buy tickets and get on planes, there is a virtual registration available, and I'll give you those details shortly. But I just wanted to give you a bit of an overview of the program and some of the speakers. We're talking about US highways, adoption of IFC as an open standard for engineering data for roads and bridges. Alexa Mitchell is the Highway Roads BIM Director at HDR. David Unkfer works for the FHWA Resource Center, and Jag Malella at WSP is a Senior Vice President and is Director of Research and Innovation Solutions. So some terrific speakers talking about some of the open roads and open bridge standards initiatives. Next slide, please. We also have Roger Grant, who many of you know from NIBS, who's working on the US National BIM Plan. And Kimon has been a long-time advocate of BIM, of open standards, and is working with Building Smart and part of an OGC coordination initiative for BIM GIS integration. They'll be talking about open data as an asset for project lifecycle. Next slide, please. We have a additional discussion around open standards. Mike Busleman, chair of the Joint Committee on Data Standards at AASHTO, will be joining Alexa. Will Sharp is Global Director for Transport Highways for HDR. And Jesus is going to talk about some of the work he's doing managing the BIM program for Caltrans. So a good mix of people who are both leading the policy decisions being made, but also the practical implementation. Next slide. So OpenBIM is a name that Building Smart have adopted for just the use of open standards and the sharing of data and interoperability. Dennis Sheldon, who's at RPI as part of the case unit as the director there, has been doing technical work with Building Smart for a long time. Deke Smith is executive director of the Academic Interoperability Council, working with 70 different universities worldwide. And Jeff Ollett is an international project coordinator for Building Smart. So they're really talking about how OpenBIM is not just available today, but evolving as well. Next slide, please. Digital twins is a huge and important concept for our industry. It's embryonic in terms of how do we do it, how do we figure that out. There are a lot of people working on that. We've got some terrific expertise to talk about that as part of the conference. Calvin Cam, longtime Building Smart contributor internationally, adjunct professor at Stanford SciFi, the Center for Integrated Facilities Engineering at Stanford University. George at the Utah DOT, who's our facilitator today for this webinar, is doing some terrific pioneering work. And Cindy Baldwin is the chair of the airport committee for Building Smart US chapter and is leading some efforts in terms of several working groups that are contributing to open standards, one of which is focused on the digital twins. Luke Faulkner is a board member of the BIM Forum and has been very instrumental at the American Institute of Steel Construction on some BIM steel initiatives for open standards for fabrication. So again, a good cross-section and diverse view of where we need to head to really solve the promise of digital twins. Next slide, please. The names that you haven't seen here are Renata Fruchter, who's at the PBL lab at Stanford, a collaboration that involves project learning across many different international countries, and Tony Ranella, who's been very active in the AIA and is our Director of Professional Certification, and they're going to be talking about some of the education, training and certification opportunities for open standards. Next slide, please. Specifically in regard to airports, we've had a lot of focus on highways and bridges, but there is a section where we're focused on airports. Airports, of course, are mini cities. They include roads, tunnels, rail. So it's really an interesting way to think about how open data standards come together across civil, architectural and other engineering disciplines for a whole airport campus and all of the components. So we'll have Scott Yates, who leads our data working group at the airport room. Cindy, I've introduced to you. Esther is Senior Environmental Planner at HDR. She's going to talk about the work she's done with Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. And Cameron Schaefer is Transport Data Acquisition Director at HDR, who's involved in a lot of very complex, large mega projects for HDR, which is a big data problem to solve, and open standards are an important part of that. So again, a good mix of practical application of open standards. Next slide, please. We do have a piece on the agenda relating to vertical buildings and the collaboration of project teams. And I would encourage you, even if you're involved with roads and highways, to listen in. Jim Bedrick's been very involved in the level of development specification work that's been adopted by the AIA. John Tocci Sr. and John Tocci Jr. are practitioners in the construction field where they consume BIM information that's created by design. Stephen Lewis from Arcadis is representing the design view. And Jan is the chair of the BIM Forum and is going to be talking about just the importance of data as a deliverable that needs to be managed. Next slide, please. So I wanted to point you to where you can look at the full details of the program. It is at the Building Smart USA website. If you pull down the menu for events, you'll see the Open Standards Conference, and for every day, June 14, 15, and 16, you'll see the full program and speakers. Next slide, please. To register, there is a registration button on that page, and you'll see that there is a 3-day pass to attend in person, but also a virtual pass to attend online, and certainly would encourage you to go to that events page on our website to register. And then finally, we get a lot of questions about what is IFC. It's a term that we use in the Building Smart community to design, talk about our standard, our open design schema for the domain. There is a special report that's being published by AEC Magazine. It's about 16 pages. We'll be sending this to you digitally. I'd like you to keep an eye out for it because it does answer the question, what is IFC, why it's important, and how is it being used on some very large projects, in this case in the UK, which is the origin of this report. So we'll be sharing that with you via our email and LinkedIn posts. So Randy, thank you. That's the Open BIM USA event.
Okay, thanks, George. This is Will Sharp with HDR. I am filling in for Mike today. Mike was on PTO and had some travel challenges today, so I think he's on a plane as we speak. But Mike was going to talk about the AASHTO Joint Subcommittee on Data Standardization. So if you can go to the next slide, Randy. And this really started back in the fall of 2019 at the AASHTO annual meeting in St. Louis. And at that meeting, all of the state DOT CEOs unanimously adopted a resolution to adopt IFC as the standard for the DOTs. They also noted that they wanted to form this new cross-committee multidiscipline group within AASHTO to really coordinate all of the schema efforts across all of the different areas of AASHTO. So that is this committee, and also that they are studying AASHTO joining Building Smart International. So next slide. So these are the folks that are on the Joint Subcommittee on Data Standardization. As you can see here, trying to have a common data standard across all of AASHTO, there's a lot of different groups involved. Not only is it the designers on the bridge side and the roadway side, but construction's being considered, asset management's being considered, AASHTOware, so really all of these groups will be a part of this Joint Subcommittee on Data Standardization. I have talked with Mike on several occasions. I know his group has been formed. Mike is the chair of this group. He's the CIO of Montana DOT, and his specialty is more on the data side. And my understanding is this group is stood up, and they're just developing their high-level goals right now. One other thing to note with this group too, and I've talked to Mike about this, is they feel it's going to be important to involve other stakeholders as well, such as AGC or ACEC or some of the academia folks, because we're really all partners in this. We're all in this together. So I think there'll be a lot more to come on this group in the coming months. So next slide. And these are some of the high-level goals that Mike provided for this group. And really, a lot of it is coordination. It's coordinating with all these different AASHTO groups, to talk about open data standards and how we coordinate adoption of those standards amongst the groups. And really, Mike has told me too that they really want to eliminate duplication of efforts. So they really want to optimize efforts across the different groups, as AASHTO moves more into open data standards. So like I said, you'll see a lot more on this group in the next few months. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jim to give an update on the BIM for Bridges and Structures Transportation Pool Fund.
Thanks, Will. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. Thanks. Thank you. The Transportation Pooled Fund, BIM for Bridges, is a product of 24 states and the FHWA. It's very much a national effort that has produced an IDM that will be balloted at COBS this year. In 2019, AASHTO adopted the IFC standard. Next slide, please. As you're probably aware, We are in the midst of a paradigm shift in our industry. We are shifting towards digital delivery, model as a legal document, and digital as-builts. The overall AASHTO Bridge vision is to have a model-based approach through the life cycle of a structure. The BIM for Bridge Pooled Fund project is a critical piece of the puzzle so that these things are even a possibility. The focus of the BIM for Bridge Pooled Fund project is related to the exchange of information, the design process to fabrication and construction. Project is about developing a software standard utilizing the international non-proprietary IFC. A separate BIM for infrastructure project will be starting soon. 18 states have committed to sponsor. Hopefully this will be getting started in 22 or 23. More states are welcome to sponsor. Next slide, please. A BIM for Bridge project objective led to the adoption of the IFC for the U.S. bridge industry. But what does this mean? So an analogy is a PDF is a 2D exchange, essentially a national standard, although not officially necessary. PDFs work because it's an ISO standard. It's an open, non-proprietary format. It's easy to share PDFs. Most softwares have an export to PDF button. Going back to the project objectives, IFC is a solution for exchanging 3D models and associated data. IFC is also an open, non-proprietary format. It is also an ISO standard. It challenges that software does not have this export to IFC button yet for modeling bridges. The goal of this pooled fund is to make that happen. IFC 4.3 is expected to get ISO acceptance either in Q1 or Q2 of 23. Next slide, please. The BIM for Bridge pooled fund objectives. Objective 1 was to develop IDMs. This will be balloted this year, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. Objective 2 is develop MVDs. The first MVD is close to being completed and is expected to be balloted next year. Outcome 3, development of a software certification is being developed currently along with the unit test suite and should be completed by the end of year 5 work. Stakeholder training is scoped and is part of year 5 work. Next slide, please. So what is an IDM? An IDM is a document that captures the information that's needed to be exchanged for a specific purpose that will be balloted at COBS this year. An IDM provides a human readable set of information requirements for exchange of model-based information to execute the construction of highway bridges in the United States. Provides an industry narrative that defines the data requirements and informs the development of IFC technical details. Next slide. The current IDM being balloted is from design to construction. Specific data exchanges for design to construction for a set of bridge types. Currently, we have not focused on unique structures, but are focusing on what the majority of the bridges are. So we had slab bridge girders will be defined, common buried structures, retaining walls. Additional IDMs can be built for other uses in the future, construction to as-builts and as-builts to asset management to complete that life cycle management. Next slide, please. To enable this exchange, we need to describe the objects in the model as the associated information. For example, the bridge model contains girders. We take a look at the girder as an object type. We can now define its properties. Properties can either be geometric or non-geometric. In this example, the object has general properties, geometry, dimension, location, material properties, and additional information about sub-elements that are part of the girder. So the IDM serves two purposes. It provides the instructions to the designer on what needs to be included to the model. It's a recipe for the IFC experts and software developers to create a computer language model IFC. Next slide. Oh, kind of already covered this one. This is kind of the data that's associated, pre-stressed girder, you got to define the strands, depth, and all the items associated with it. I think we can move on to the next slide. So I want to talk about model view definitions a little bit, just because we talked about IDMs. A model view definition is a subset of the overall IFC schema. It is necessary to support one or many specific data exchange requirements. Model view definitions allow us to exchange only the information that is needed for a particular transaction. Software vendors then implement specific model view definitions. The combination of all the model view definitions are what make up the entire like federated, digital model that someday, hopefully soon, we will have. Next slide. So the BIM for Bridge Pooled Fund received a 1-year extension, and that's the year 5. We've identified some tasks that we wanted to complete with this 1-year extension. We're going to provide technical assistance to the vendors during the Building Smart International BSI certification process, develop transition plans with recommendations for continued management of the collaboration. Next slide. The second BIM for Bridge Pooled Fund. So 18 states have committed to funding the BIM for Bridge Infrastructure Pooled Fund, and more states are welcome to sponsor. The second BIM for Bridge Pooled Fund that we want to do will be a continuation of the first BIM for Bridge Pooled Fund. So we developed one IDM as part of this first BIM for Bridge Pooled Fund. We need to develop more. There is a separate, as I just mentioned, BIM for Infrastructure Pooled Fund. And this would be a parallel effort with them. So a lot of things need to happen, but in order to keep pushing BIM for bridges along and keep developing and keep the momentum we have, we felt it's necessary to have a second BIM for Bridge Pooled Fund. And so we've gotten, I think, 10, 11 commitments already, and would be very happy to have more sponsors and continue that effort moving forward. That's all I had to say. I think I kept it under my 5 minutes. I'll introduce Brian McInnes with Trimble. He will provide an update for the American Roads and Transportation Builders Association. Thank you very much.
Brian, I think you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh, no, we can't.
Road and Transportation Builders Association Innovation and Technology Steering Committee. Next slide. The ARPA, or American Transportation and Road Builders Association Innovation and Technology Forum, is a new initiative within the organization, established in September of 2020 after ARPA's strategic plan was implemented. The Innovation and Technology Forum includes ARPA members from all divisions: contractors, planners and design division, equipment manufacturers division, materials services division, research and education, P3s, traffic safety and transportation officials division. So part of the mandate for the new Innovation and Technology Forum is to have representative members from ARPA members span across the project life cycle, from planning and design to capital planning, construction, and asset management. The mission is to identify best practices around technology advancements in the industry and to maximize the benefits that can be achieved through a wide range of innovations. Steve Berglund is the executive chair of Trimble and chair of the forum within ARPA. Digital construction is actually the first initiative within the Innovation and Technology Forum, and it involves the focus on digital project delivery, digital twins, and that's why we're proud to be a part of this important webinar series and firmly believe that digital delivery and digital twins will drive and advance forward the advances that we're going to see throughout the project life cycle in the transportation industry in the United States. Next slide. So as part of the digital policy, the digital construction policy, the charter has defined as the first initiative digital construction as the commercially proven digital technologies and process for management of construction and engineering activities, including systems for infrastructure projects, procurement, planning, and coordination of construction, digital as-built and e-ticketing operations and maintenance, modernization and management of assets throughout the system for machines, site equipment, and personnel is included in the policy statement as a charter for the technology, innovation and technology steering committee. Digital construction technologies will provide mechanisms and process to decrease and more properly allocate project risk, reduce schedule uncertainty, increase productivity and efficiency, lower costs, deliver safer, higher quality, and environmentally sustainable infrastructure projects. Next. In order to accelerate innovation in the U.S. transportation and design and construction industry, ARPA supports the adoption of open data standards, the model as the legal document, and modern commercially proven and competitively acquired digital construction technology and processes for infrastructure projects. Next slide. So the next steps for the Innovation and Technology Steering Committee, or the forum, is the forum was officially approved by ARPA board in May of 2021. So the board is fully active and engaged. And as we stated in the previous slide, digital construction is the first innovation within the forum, or within the steering committee within ARPA. The goal is to deliver recommendations as described around digital construction and digital twins towards best practices. We're working with FHWA, industry associations and groups in the ongoing and advancement of digital project delivery. Ongoing education includes webinars, ARPA conferences, and articles. And we'll see more in the coming weeks and months around the initiative within ARPA and throughout the industry. Next slide. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Brian. This is Will Sharp with HDR, and I'm going to provide an update on the American Council of Engineering Companies. And I did want to say, Brian, I've been involved in the ARPTA Innovation and Technology Forum. That's been a great group. Allison Klein with ARPTA has kind of organized that, and just really a great group to work with. So appreciate the efforts there. With ACEC, I wanted to note some of the efforts that we've been having, and John Rathke with Mead and Hunt and myself the last 4 years have been working with the AASHTO Joint Technical Committee on Electronic Engineering Standards and really providing ACEC input to this committee. So next slide. And this slide looks very similar to what Jim Hauber showed. You know, this is, a lot of us share this same transportation industry vision, which really is to leverage open data standards throughout the project lifecycle, all the way through design to construction and fabrication into asset management. And we feel the way to do that is really these open data standards that are ISO compliant, such as IFC and OGC. So this is really a key effort that drives many of us in these efforts. So next slide. So this is a map that I'm trying to keep up to date. It's really a U.S. summary of the transportation industry as we move to model as the legal document. And the states in green here, 5 states that have actually not only designed but constructed projects with model as legal document. And later in this webinar, you're going to hear from 3 of those 5 states on particular projects that have been completed. So there's been great activity there. The 4 states in orange are in the process of conducting their first pilot with model as legal document. And the ones in blue, I'm aware, have model as legal document included in their strategic planning. So I think you're going to see a lot more activity in this area, you know, as we move forward. So I often get asked, and we talk about this a lot with ACEC, with the Transportation and Risk Management Committees, how is the risk different when using BIM as a contractual deliverable? And there's several things to keep in mind here. One is the tremendous amount of digital data involved. We're talking construction level accuracy models that'll support automated machine guidance, grading and paving, so that's much more challenging to develop and check that information. I can tell you also from the consultant perspective, there's many unknowns with these 3D contractual deliverables. There's no established standard of care with this type of data. So next slide. So one of the things that John Rathke and I did with Matt Reifer's help with ACEC is we sent a national survey to the engineering companies just to identify, what are your concerns with model as legal document. So this was back in February of 2020. These are the top 5 concerns that were noted. Number 1, data security. How do we lock down these digital deliverables so they cannot be inadvertently changed? Number 2, clear definition of the model accuracies and tolerances. I can tell you as a professional engineer, we need to understand what we're signing, and really what level of information is really expected with these. How do you QC these 3D models? We've also there were discussions about lack of contractor experience. I know many of the major contractors have embraced digital delivery in BIM, but many of the subs have not. And, how are they going to use this 3D model information? How are we going to get it into formats that they can use with their software? And then the last issue was just the investment moving to this new technology. So next slide. So our main focus with the JTCES AASHTO committee has been the level of development subcommittee. And this subcommittee, really took on, how do we describe these models? What are the requirements for this? So some of the main things that we've developed, probably the top thing is the model element breakdown framework. And this was developed to really address a lot of those ACEC concerns. And with this model development framework, this is a national framework that many of the states have already started to use, but it lays out element by element, what's the intended purpose of the information? What are limitations with the information? Is it contractual or for information only? Who's the professional engineer that's responsible for that information? So it really clearly lays out, these model-based deliverables and really what's provided. And we really recommend as ACEC that this model element breakdown be developed when we scope the projects out, and this be part of the contractual deliverables that are provided to the contractor. So that way the owner, the contractor, the designers are all on the same page on really the intended use and limitation of this digital information. So I did want to say we really appreciate the opportunity to work with AASHTO on this. It's been great working with JTCES on this and having the opportunity to provide our designer input. So next slide. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to George to go through designer perspectives.
Thanks, Will. So we're going to have 4 of our consultants talk about their experiences delivering projects with model as the legal document. Today we have Grant Schmitz, Nicole Williams, Gordon Green, and Tyler Turner. Grant Schmitz is a bridge engineer in HDR's Des Moines office. He has 9 years of experience in bridge design, modeling, and inspection work. Grant's been heavily involved in BIM for bridges and structures over the last 5 years. His work assisting with the development of the I-80 and I-380 bridge BIM models led to one of the nation's first 3D BIM deliverables for design bid build contract. Since then, he's been involved with a number of other states and national initiatives to promote and enhance the use of BIM. Gordon Green is the Executive Vice President at Patel Green and Associates. With more than 22 years of experience, he has built a diverse technical foundation, serving as a project manager, engineer of record, and principal in charge of projects throughout Florida. He served as project manager and roadway engineer for record for the Polk Parkway 3D AMG pilot project for Florida's Turnpike Enterprises. the roadway and drainage models were signed and sealed as a legal document. He also is currently working and serving as project manager for another 3D AMG pilot project for a new alignment project. It's the Central Polk Parkway from US 17 to SR 60 for Florida's Turnpike Enterprise that will also be signed and sealed with the model as the legal contract document. Nicole Williams is a professional engineer with Kimberly Horn. She's a project manager and design lead on several digital delivery projects. Nicole has 16 years of experience designing and managing roadway projects for state departments of transportation and municipalities. In the last 3 years, she has partnered closely with UDOT to support development of digital delivery processes, guidelines, standards, and the advancement toward a digital twin. Nicole has supported more than 6 digital delivery pilot projects, and she's passionate about advancing this initiative delivery method. And then finally, we have Tyler Turner. He's a PE with civil science. He's the vice president. His primary business function is a senior project manager and transportation division manager. As a senior project manager with 8 years of experience, Tyler successfully managed hundreds of multidisciplinary projects for all project delivery methods, including design bid build, CMGC, design build, and digital delivery. So with that, let's get started. And if you want to advance the slide, Randy, that would be great. And we'll start out with Tyler Turner for Civil Science talking about his project in Utah. Tyler?
Yeah, thanks, George. I appreciate this opportunity to talk about this project. If you'll advance the slide, Randy. This was a simple roadway widening project located in southern Utah. What made this project different from the others that you'll hear about today is that it was a pilot project delivered with Civil 3D. So why Civil 3D? What's listed here were the goals of the project. What we wanted to achieve was to take UDOT's current model development standards and see if they could be software agnostic, and then document those issues where they weren't and develop procedures to where we could make them work for Civil 3D and other projects looking forward. It was kind of mentioned earlier, but on these types of projects, we get feedback from contractors about how our files are consumed. And so one of the other goals that we had on this project was, can we make that workflow easier? You know, on some of our other projects, we take them from a Bentley product that they're converted to Civil 3D and then ultimately into TBC or something like that. So we wanted to see if we could improve that workflow as we transition our projects towards construction. Next slide, Randy. One of the biggest challenges we had to overcome on this project was that we had no standards for Civil 3D. UDOT has done a great job in developing their model development standards, but they were built around Bentley workspaces. So not only were we delivering a models legal document project, but we also created the start of what we're calling a Civil 3D state kit or standards that could be used on other projects in the future should UDOT choose to do others. What we found as we got into this project is we started to develop that state kit was that it was an iterative process. There were several challenges that we experienced along the way, as with a lot of projects, but we had a couple of challenges there in addition to what you might see on a typical project. And the fact that we were not only taking a standard that was already developed, but we were taking UDOT's workspace standards and their model development standards and creating them for Civil 3D. I'll go over a couple of the challenges that we experienced here. We'll probably talk about some of the others in our upcoming panel discussion. We used BIM 360 on this project. Randy, if you go back to the previous slide for just a second. Thank you. So file management within BIM 360, there was a lot of data conversion that went from Civil 3D into BIM 360 and a lot of challenges in having that display correctly. BIM 360 was the tool that was used not only during design, but planned for construction. It would be the document or the software that the contractor and the field personnel would use to see the data and use the data. And there was challenges in taking what looked great in Civil 3D, the way it needed to look, and then how it was displayed inside BIM 360. So there was challenges there. Another challenge that we saw was the file size, and I think we see this a lot in Bentley as well. But the technology wouldn't allow us to have long corridors. We found ourselves splitting up the project into segments, different sides of the roads, and different things like that. And then another one is it had restrictions in multiple users being in the same file. The way that Civil 3D structures their data, it's all tied to the file, and there were some limitations in having multiple people in a single file. So when it comes to delivering a project and the people that are involved in it, it started to put a little bit of a different structure to our teams and those that were working on when it comes to engineers and technicians. Ultimately, we were able to take and deliver this project according to UDOT's model development standards and met the level of development LODs that were required, but it was with more iteration than anticipated. All right, Randy, next slide. I mentioned some of the challenges before. The success of this project really was the team. We had Autodesk had a dedicated team on their side as we worked through the challenges in development of the standards and the templates. That state kit that we talked about, they were in all of our meetings and a big part of the evolution and the success of the project. We also had Kiewit involved. We talked earlier, or I mentioned earlier, about the office to field goal. That was a big focus as we kicked off the project, and they played a key role in reviewing our files and providing feedback to ensure that they were consumable as we were using a new format. So a big part of it was the team. Next, Randy. So how to review design files is always a concern on these projects. I like to bring up and share successes, and I think that on these types of projects, this is always a concern, and I feel like this is one of the things that went really well on this project were the design reviews. I mentioned before that we used BIM 360. We went all in on the use of that as the file management. And inside BIM 360, they have some great review tools that allows not only the designers, but really the entire team, construction, contractors to get in and review and make comments. There was a big learning curve with BIM 360. So we worked together with Autodesk, and we put together essentially a how-to. It showed how to access it, to review files. We created training videos, and as we went into the design review, we provided additional assistance. We created templates that allowed the reviewers to kind of follow their standard procedures as they made comments. And then ultimately, as it went towards comment resolution, we're able to track changes and as the designers and show how those were resolved. Like I mentioned, I feel like the reviews on this project were one of the bigger successes. Next slide. Just real quickly, this is kind of shows that workflow within BIM 360 on the right. You can see graphically how a reviewer can open a file, go in and actually look at and pick a point on the file and show the location of their comment or their concern, and then the template that we created allowed them to give a description to their comment. And ultimately that workflow that's shown on the screen shows how a designer, a modeler can go in and look at their files, track the issues or the comments through the entire length of the project. This is a quick summary of the highlights of some of this project. The project just started construction, so we're looking forward to getting some feedback back from construction. With that, I'll transition to Nicole to let her discuss her project.
Thank you, Tyler. Next slide. So I've been involved in 6 digital delivery projects in various different roles, as well as a few other with just some minor roles. For my section of the presentation, I'd like to focus not on a single project, but a little bit more on the overall thoughts on the digital delivery projects and the process overall. In the beginning, UDOT started their digital delivery projects with including plan sheets with their project to be used as information only. But as our designers and contractors got more comfortable with digital delivery, we've transitioned to doing fully digital plan sheets, fully digital delivery, with the exception of structures, as they're piloting their very own projects on the side. As our 209, which is our 9000 South project, was the first UDOT project that didn't have any cut sheets. And we learned so much from that experience that has really helped shape a lot of what we do now. Utilizing this project experience, I was able to help UDOT develop their digital delivery guidelines, their one-stop shop website, as well as our ORD workspace as the project manager for the digital delivery and process development 8 grant project that just wrapped. I would like to talk a little bit more on some of the challenges that we came across that ultimately got translated into solutions and developed into guidelines for future use. Next slide. So one of the things I think that a lot of people have concerns about or feel like is a challenge is just the translation between software. There is no easy button to convert MicroStation or Bentley ORD files into other softwares such as GIS, Trimble, TopCon, Leica when we first started. And so there was just a lot of concern on making sure that the information that the contractors got was the same as the information that the designers created. And you know, in the beginning, there's really was no international BIM format that has been released and still isn't completely released. And so no defined format means every software developer processes 3D breaklines differently, and the contractor has to try to decipher the designer's model and, more importantly, the designer's intent. And so one of the things that we learned as we went through our pilot projects is that it was extremely important to have a file naming convention, a template point naming convention, and CAD validation, and a GIS conversion or some type of a conversion platform. And the template point naming convention specifically being so that we could translate that into a 3D breaklines file and deliver that to the contractor. And when they read those 3D breaklines, they understood exactly what point was what and how it related back to our templates in our modeling scenario. And so we created these standards as part of the 8 grant project and in conjunction with the pilot projects as we went along, and we would, you know, come up upon an issue and realize that we need guidelines or standards to help solve that issue. And so it was really great to be part of the team that got to come across those challenges and then come up with a solution to help them. And I think what this did was it just ensured that the contractor was getting the same deliverable every single time they opened up a new bid for each package. They could have confidence that it had a consistent deliverable, and they knew what they were looking for, and they understood the designer intent behind the information that they were getting. I know that we've heard from several contractors local that they went from taking weeks to sift through all of the information to taking days because they understand what they're getting now with the standardization. Next slide. So some of the other challenges, and I know Tyler touched on some of the reviews already, but some of the challenges that we have come across and are still trying to work out is just how do we get design reviews for UDOT, for cities, utility owners, and key stakeholders that may not even have ORD as software on their computer. And I think that this was a really big hurdle that we had to get over at first. And so our team had to provide trainings before reviews. We developed several different platforms to do reviews in, including simple PDFs, Google Earth, and GIS maps. Currently on my Springville Spanish Fork digital delivery project, we are piloting a GIS review tool, which you can see a screenshot there in the bottom right. And it allows reviewers to go in and add a comment per specific discipline, and then we can extract those all into a comment resolution form. And so we're trying that out, but to date, there isn't really a great tool to allow them to see a 3D review, other than, you know, displaying contours, which still doesn't give them as much information as they would like. So still working through some of that, but it's nice that we've gone through several different iterations and utilized different tools throughout. And I think we're still trying to zero in on the best tool, but just trying to be understanding that those around you aren't used to this and this is new to them. And so trying to help them out with providing, you know, an additional PDF, not a full plan sheet, but something that they are a little bit more familiar with, I think is important as you go through the process. Next slide. The quality control is another big topic and issue, and a lot of people have a lot of questions for it. Going back to our first digital delivery project, we piloted a method where we did a save as of the DGN, and we actually physically yellowed out things and went through UDOT's green, yellow, blue checklist process. And it was okay, but it wasn't ideal for what we were trying to do. And it was hard to track what had been checked and if something had changed after it had been checked with that method. And so on our current project, we're piloting an item types quality control review. And we are utilizing those item types to track each of the QC checklist steps. And then we're using filters to filter on and off and highlight at what step each of the elements within the design are at. And again, we are doing a save as of the original file first, so that, you know, if the design changes, it doesn't just reflect in the QC drawing. But that gives us a snapshot at every single deliverable. And from a QA standpoint, they're able to quickly turn filters on and off to determine whether or not each step of the QC process has been completed for every single element within the drawing. And we've seen some really good results with this. We're really excited to be trying this out. All right, next slide. So a few other things for everybody to consider that's different than normal delivery is normally we deliver a handful of documents, mainly plans, specs, and estimates. With digital delivery, you deliver hundreds of files, and that's why organization, standard naming convention, and standardization are so important. This allows the contractor to digest these files in a timely manner instead of just spending weeks sifting through files trying to figure out what everything is. If you model everything in 3D, that's underground, such as utilities, street lights, storm drain, signal poles, signs, etc. To the best of your ability with the information that you have, you can also run clash detection, which we found is really beneficial because you can set any offset on those elements, run the clash detection, and figure out where you may have conflicts, and you can fix them in pre-construction phase of the project instead of waiting until construction phase of the project. And so what we've seen in this is we've seen a reduced number of change orders in the fields. One example on my 9000 South project was that we ran clash detection and discovered that we had placed all of our signposts punching straight through a storm drain. And when we ran that clash detection, it highlighted all of those areas. And so we were able to adjust our signpost to not punch through the storm drain, but also add notes so that the sign contractor understood why we changed it from a standard offset. And we were able to update that in pre-construction and didn't have that conflict when we got to construction. Lastly, I just wanted to make a quick plug for UDOT's website. It's been 3.5 years in the making through the A grant project, but also pulled a lot of information in from committees that UDOT has developed, as well as other pilot projects. And they have a wealth of knowledge there, guidelines, tips and tricks, training videos, There's 30-something training videos on there. And they go over the validation and conversion tools as well, which I think also really help ensure that there's a standardized deliverable at the end. And I just really encourage everybody to go check that out and see what UDOT has put a lot of time and energy and effort into creating to help with the standardization of this entire process. And with that, I will go ahead and turn the time over to Gordon Green.
Thanks, Nicole. Go ahead to the next slide, Randy. So I'm really going to be focusing on one project for the most part. That was our pilot project for the Polk Parkway, where we were piloting 3D as the signed and sealed contract document and the use of automated machine guidance. Scope of this job was milling and resurfacing and some safety upgrades. Where the AMG came in a big way was there were several areas of cross slope and super elevation correction. There was some drainage on the job as well that was included in that signing and sealing of the 3D model. Some of our goals, other than just signing and sealing that model, were to leverage that and reduce the number of sheets that are produced in the plan set, as well as the amount of labeling that was included on those plans, all while balancing and maintaining a product that is both biddable and obviously constructible. And then there was the use of that AMG. So we actually wrote specs to require the use of AMG during construction. It was really helpful. We had a couple meetings with the construction industry, brought them in to review those revised specs and get their feedback. That helped us, I think, develop a much better product there. Next slide. So some of the challenges that we faced, for the most part, you know, it was as expected. We knew we were preparing a 3D model, but some of the surprises were things that can be prepared pretty simply with traditional 2D plans. So that detail on the top right was something we had to prepare because an issue on one of the ramps where the pavement thickness on the shoulder by what we were doing was creating a 3/4 inch lip, and so we wanted to make that flush. You know, drawing up that detail traditionally might have taken, you know, 30 minutes, an hour, something like that. Well, when you're signing and sealing the model and that surface, you got to model all that, and so you know, you got to do custom templates. You got to get in there and customize that, and that takes some extra time. So that's just one example of where you definitely have to pay attention to make sure these little details are covered in the model, not just with the detail. And then many of you, if you've been doing 3D modeling and converting those to XML services, you know we have to eliminate vertical faces. So that was something we learned back when we were doing this project. I guess it's been 3 or 4 years ago now. So we learned the best ways to do that. And then QC review. So we're maybe a little more rudimentary, at least we were then. You can see in the bottom right, that's a snip from some of our actual QC documents where we, you know, snip it and circle it. But if you look close, you can see the sort of dark blue and light blue. That's our 3D model in section view. And then what we started to do is we would take the XML surface that we were generating. This is the surface that we're actually, you know, sending to the contractor to plug into their equipment. We run it back through the sections as a surface. And if you think you're going to develop these 3D models and get it just like you want it, and everything's going to just convert cleanly over to XML, you'll learn that that's not how it works. There's often a lot of cleanup, and you got to do these reviews. So you can see that brown line is the XML surface, and we apparently goofed something up with a point name or something, and it grabbed the wrong point over there on the edge of pavement and jumped up, and you can see it, the brown line sort of cutting across and not representing our model. So that was part of our QC process. We caught a lot of things that way and were able to clean them up before everything went out to the contractor. Next slide, please. Another challenge was in the actual signing and sealing. So we signed and sealed 2 sort of groups of things. We actually signed and sealed the DGN files as well as the XML files. So XML file signing was a piece of cake. DOT Central Office has created a tool that makes it real simple. You can batch sign, you can put all the language in there you need, and it's great. The Bentley digital signature tool is pretty buggy. not very stable, was not set up to accommodate the required language. You can see what we had to do there. That figure on top had to break it up into 3 separate fields. A little janky, but we made it work. And there's no batch signing, so you have to go into each individual one. So that was definitely not ideal. FDOT since then is, I guess, part of a lesson learned from that project, moving forward with a manifest on the signature sheet in the 2D plans, which I think is similar to how UDOT and maybe some other states have done it in the past. So we've solved that problem. Next slide. Some of our construction lessons learned in terms of AMG performance in the milling and paving. We learned from the contractors that the milling is very responsive and accurate. They have a lot of trust in milling to that surface very closely. They are much less confident in the paving. It's less responsive and ride can suffer. So we did AMG for everything. So the correction areas, the match existing areas, everything. And so when you're trying to model a match existing, you're really just matching whatever that surveyed surface is. The crossslope is constantly varying. And while the mill can handle that okay, the paver really cannot. And so same thing with the super elevation transition areas. So we had to keep an eye on that. And some lessons learned we had was moving forward, we may only apply AMG to the correction areas and AMG for milling only, and let the contractor and their experienced paving operators do their thing when it comes to uniform lifts coming back up from the mill. Next slide, please. In terms of data interoperability, it was a little disappointing that our signed and sealed XML files were immediately converted by the contractor's vendor when it comes to them to get them into the Trimble equipment or whatever it is they're using. Ideally, we'd like to see our signed and sealed surfaces feed right in, and so maybe some of that IFC stuff we learned about earlier will solve that problem. Other issues were model review by the contractor. We didn't really have a good digital design review tool available to us, and as you might expect, construction staff was very limited, basically zero CAD proficiency, and so it was left to us to give a crash course in MicroStation to the contractor, but more so to the CEI staff who had tasks to perform and needed to get into those files, and they had to learn to get into the native files, which can be cumbersome to folks that really have no experience. And so we look forward to some of these digital design review tools making that a little bit easier. We did attempt to use Bentley iModels, but back in 2017, 2018, when we were doing this project, they really weren't much used, didn't provide much value in as far as that goes. So you see a photo of us there walking the contractor and the CEI team through some of our stuff. So next slide. I think this is my last one. So some more lessons learned. When we got out there, the contractor was experiencing holes, what we call them, in the 3D surface. As you see it in that top graphic, that big dip, that was occurring at template transitions. And so the solution the contractor came up with was to just turn the AMG off when he saw this coming, and then turn it back on when we got to the other side. It's only about 10 to 15 feet, so it wasn't a big deal, but obviously sort of mortifying for us. And so the lesson learned there is, yeah, we check the cross sections like I showed you earlier, but we probably need to check the profile too, so we can identify those dips and fix those before they go out. And then just checking your survey when that comes in. You can have issues like you see here with existing barrier walls being confused with pavement, and clean that stuff up as it comes up. I think that was my last slide. So yeah, we'll hand it over to Grant, who I think is going to talk about bridge modeling.
All right, thanks, Gordon. So yeah, I'll be talking about the Iowa DOT I-80, I-380 project near Iowa City, Iowa. So I'll start with a quick overview here. You can see an aerial view. This was a complete reconstruction of the interchange. You can see the existing cloverleaf configuration, and the yellow and red represent the new alignments. So this consisted of 3 bridges, flyovers in this new configuration: ramp BH, ramp B, and ramp H. These were all steel plate girder bridges. You can see the horizontal curvature, vertical curvature. Total length for these bridges was around 4,200 feet. Some of the unique features of this that really, pushed the boundaries of the software: the diverging gore area in ramp BH. We had discontinuous girders. We had complex super elevation. inspection walkways in each of the girder bays. This is something Iowa DOT has been doing on some of their longer bridges just to ease the inspection access. And then we had a number of aesthetic requirements. The substructure elements were not, your generic circular or rectangular elements. They were flared hammerhead piers, and then we also had some aesthetic features in the barrier elements. Next slide, please. So to go over the goals of this project initially, the initial goal was to develop a BIM model as complete as possible. We used Bentley software in their recommended workflow of OpenBridge Modeler, Pro Structures. And at the time, when we modeled this project back in 2017, 2018, Navigator Connect was the solution for a multi-platform viewing tool. OpenBridge Modeler and Pro Structures were our primary design tools. Lastly, we wanted to encourage contractor use. And what we're finding today is that's really a big one. A challenge that we're running into is really getting contractors on board. As you've heard on some of the other presentations, it's critical to allow us to move forward with this process. Next slide, please. So to give a quick overview of the BIM delivery method, initially when we started this project, all 3 bridges were going to be provided for information only. Ramp BH and Ramp H were delivered for information only, and we had a full 2D set of plans. After discussions with the local AGC and the Iowa DOT, the feedback we got was that the use of a for information model would really be limited by the contractor. So they actually encouraged us to go the model as a legal document route, and that's what we did for Bridge 3 in this image here. What we wanted to achieve, obviously, in our initial goal was to get their feedback, and we really got that by requiring the model as a legal document. We held regular meetings with the contractor, not only to gather that feedback, to also provide support to them as well. Signing and sealing for this was handled through a special provision. This was a new process for the DOT, and really it worked well. We not only provided the seals and list of covered documents, but also touched on things such as level of development, deficiencies just due to software limitations at the time. This was a design bid build project, and as such, we really didn't have a lot of opportunity to work with a specific contractor on their workflows and how to utilize the model. So we did a number of training sessions. We had a contractor information meeting where we brought all interested contractors that would potentially bid on the project, to Ames, Iowa, to go over the model in person. We also posted some training videos to support that. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we gathered some the contractor feedback throughout the process. Construction wrapped up in the fall of 2020. So our feedback, I think, is pretty much wrapped up from that standpoint. The biggest one from an advantage standpoint was visualization. I think it's probably one of the more obvious benefits, at least for the bridge side of things. When you got these complex aesthetic hammerhead piers that you can see here in the left image, just imagining how those rebar cages come together. Structural steel, as I mentioned earlier, we had some discontinuous girders, we had inspection walkways, running clash detection, just seeing how everything came together was a huge advantage. They did have some challenges pulling certain information, cutting sheets and providing information to subs. The smaller subs don't want to invest in the expensive software, although there are some free alternatives for Bentley. I think Bentley View was used by them at the time. And lastly, it's just working with technology in the field as you're trying to, build the formwork for bridge. We've all experienced the challenges with technology and the environment. So, battery life, cold weather, gloves, and trying to touch a touchscreen. They're all challenges that they learn to deal with. Post-construction uses. We did go through and update the model for as-built information. This was a separate project that just wrapped up earlier this year. And we also looked at some options for utilizing the model for asset management, which we really didn't find a good solution for this at the time. So this was really kind of on hold for the time being. Next, please. So as I mentioned, digital as-built is something that we just wrapped up with recently. We did receive some additional stick funding to incorporate these. The main objectives was really to update the model elements based on what was actually constructed in the field. And you can see a list there on the bottom left table of what we did update: pier elevations, disc bearings. We used some anchor bolt wells. Girder haunch reinforcing was added, and then we also had some survey pins that were placed during construction. We also wanted to incorporate non-model based data. So again, on the right table there on the bottom, you can see a list of stuff that we wanted to bring in. The traditional data that's collected by the contractor: shop drawings, material search, photos, RFIs, stuff that we wanted to house within the model because it's really important going forward for asset management. Lastly, we wanted to explore options to ensure future accessibility. This was a model that was developed in the Select Series V8i versions of ProStructures and OBM. It's kind of right on the brink of their transition to Connect. So we spent some time exploring ways to move the model forward and really be able to export it to an IFC version in the future, should we use it for asset management. So that's, I believe, my last slide. So George, I will turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Well, appreciate it, Grant. A couple of things. We've got a couple of questions we're going to try and answer right now. Both Nicole and Tyler know that I've been involved with all of these projects and that I butt in a lot, so I'll butt in here too. Just to sort of build on what Tyler was talking about. What UDOT wanted to do was we want to get to a point where we don't prescribe what kind of software you use to design a project. So as a DOT, we're using Bentley software, but if someone wants to design it in the software of their choice, we want a data deliverable. And so the project that Tyler's on was the perfect opportunity for us to say, hey, let's try an Autodesk delivery and see how that works with our framework in our digital delivery for a Bentley project. So Tyler, the question that was brought up is, can you clarify the general MALD workflow utilized on the project 3D deliverables? Was it converted 3D ORD model into a Civil 3D and then utilized in BIM 360 by the contractor?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for the question. So no, there was no conversion from ORD. All the files were initiated inside Civil 3D. BIM 360 is like a file management tool similar to ProjectWise. So all of our files were housed inside of BIM 360. Unlike ProjectWise, BIM 360 has a viewer technology associated to it, or allows somebody to essentially click on the file and bring it up in a browser and have some interface to it. So all of our design files were created inside Civil 3D. Like ProjectWise, BIM 360 was the file manager. And then BIM 360 was also the tool transitioned into construction. So the contractor and the field crews we're using that as the tool to view data attributes and different things. We're getting a little bit of feedback right now from construction that's not going quite as well as we'd hoped. But no, just to maybe hopefully clarify that the ORD was not used on this project and not part of that workflow.
Thanks, Tyler. And then Gordon, before we move on to the panel discussion, the question was, were there any quantity overruns on paving?
Yeah, so just a little bit, but within spec for DOT, the asphalt overran about 3.5% on average.
Okay, great. So with that, you know what, let's move on to our panel discussion. It's the same group of 4 consultants who have worked on these projects, and Alexa Mitchell and I will be moderating this discussion. And so Alexa, why don't you just jump in with the first question?
Sounds great, George. Thank you. And thank you to all of our panelists today for sharing their experience with delivering these projects with Modelless Legal Document. So let's get started with this question, and we'll start with you, Nicole, and then we'll go down the list. But from a contractual perspective, how clear were the modeling requirements on your first project? For example, did you guys know what was being asked, or what level of effort would be required to deliver what was being asked?
Sure. So on our very first project, it was somewhat unclear. We were trying to figure out exactly what level we were bringing the model to, whether or not we were going to be including watered down sheets or not. And so we had a project manager that was very willing to work with us as we developed our scope, and we made a lot of really good assumptions that we could tie back to our scope when developing that. But as we kind of worked through that with the project manager, I think it became more clear on exactly what we were delivering, exactly what we weren't delivering, that we used to deliver as part of a traditional project. And I feel like we were able to kind of narrow that in and come up with a really good scope and expectations as far as what our deliverable would be.
Thank you, Nicole. And Gordon, I know that you represent a smaller consultant. Did you have a different experience? Can you talk a little bit about your experience?
Sure. Yeah, I don't think so. For the Polk Parkway pilot project, in terms of understanding what we were being asked to do, it was pretty clear. I mean, it was a pilot project for 3D modeling, which we had been doing, but this sort of next gen plans effort of figuring out what sheets can we completely remove, and what do we not need to label anymore since we're signing and sealing the model. We knew that was open-ended, and so I feel like everyone, in terms of us, obviously, and the Turnpike and all of DOT, because Vernon Central Office were pretty involved as well, and they were already working on these things. They knew it would be iterative. They knew we would go down one avenue to see if this would work, and maybe it would and maybe it wouldn't, and we'd have to backtrack and we'd have to compromise. And everybody kept that understanding all the way through, so that was nice. No, there was never any expectation that we would know exactly how to do that and exactly how far we'd be able to cut at the beginning. And we probably, I think, also knew we wouldn't be able to be as ambitious as we wanted to be at the onset, because we did have to deliver the project and have it built. So we knew, we would push real hard, but probably have to come back on some things to make sure the job got out the door, which is how it happened. So we definitely moved the needle and achieved lots of things, but we definitely had to give and compromise on some other things to keep everyone happy.
Great. And I imagine Tyler and Grant, you had similar experience with your pilot project. So let me turn the corner a little bit and ask you something related to what Will presented earlier in the presentation about the ACEC survey that was done in early 2020. The results of the survey pretty much reveal that there's concerns. There are very many concerns regarding managing risk. So we'll start with you, Grant, but how are you managing your risk on these projects from a licensed engineer's perspective?
And Alexa, let me jump in really quick and just say, I think part of that survey was the liability and kind of that uncertainty of what am I supposed to do and how far should I model individual elements? Is that a fair way to put it?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, so the 8380 project, we were fortunate enough to be under contract as, to provide the traditional 2D design as well. So we had the advantage from that standpoint. When it comes to model checking, we had a 2D plan set to really check our model. We also consulted with the legal counsel at HDR just to make sure that we were covered, and we really focused on the information within the model. There's a lot of information that comes out that's automatically generated from these models, and you just got to be careful with what ultimately goes to the contractor. If you don't want it in the model, we use different methods. We used an iModel transformer tool to strip that information out, and really focused on each element in the pieces of information associated with that.
Thanks, Grant. And Tyler, you are in a unique position in terms that it was the first Civil 3D project. So can you share a little bit about your experience managing your risk on this type of project? Were you guys familiar with the technology?
Yeah, so the technology that we used, we're mostly familiar with. When it comes to risk and how we managed it, it's kind of changed our focus towards the trends of our industry and where they're going, and resulting from that is we've looked internally at our procedures, and started to actually create a new quality control process for essentially digital delivery of those digital files that I think in the past that we always said that we reviewed, you know, and ultimately we worried about what's on plans. That's going away. So we've started a process we're in the middle of right now is actually rewriting our quality control manual to make sure that it documents the requirements as we review our models and how we track those. Another part of what I really liked about BIM 360, and we talked about it, the design reviews and some of these other projects, were how we documented what was reviewed and the comments. And BIM 360 had essentially a version tracker where when we initiated a review, it copied and made a copy of those files, left the original files where they were, but copied those. And so that's something that we can go back and look at and see what we reviewed, what's not reviewed. And ultimately, we ended up using that process not only for the milestone reviews, but we also use that for our internal quality control reviews. So we have that same type of version history documented for all of our quality control before it went to the milestones.
Thank you. We did get a question in the Q&A, but before we go to that, does anybody else have any other comments to add to this conversation before we move on to the next question?
Alexa, I had one thing.
Go for it.
One thing that I've noticed, and this kind of builds on what Tyler said, is that before, when we were doing plan sets, and that was the legal document, you would only bring the design and the modeling to a certain point, and then you would stop and you would jump over and focus on the plan sheets and make sure that those were, you know, 100% correct. But one thing that we've found is because you're spending more time focusing on the actual design, the earthwork, the grading, all of those things, it made your design a lot more accurate. And that in return decreased some of the risks that were associated with that design being delivered to the contractor. And so I don't know if that was anticipated necessarily outcome of this, but that's something that I feel like I've seen on my projects.
Nicole, can I ask you a follow-up on that? You've been involved with a lot of these projects. Some of the first ones that I know UDOT did, we had plans as for information only, and so review teams tended to sort of fall back on those during the review. But when we stopped cutting sheets, there became different ways to look at these projects. I mean, literally, some designers would pull up SS4 and walk through the model that way. Others would use some of the mobile devices like Open Roads Navigator. Now there's iTwin Review and we're doing GIS, but what's your experience with those, and what are you leaning toward as something that seems to be the best way to review these?
Yeah, you're right, George. We used a lot of different review tools, and I'll even add on that we had virtual reality tools with some of our reviews as well. And I think it's still a little bit jury's out right now. Right now, I'm leaning a lot towards the GIS tool because it seems very user friendly. And I think that's kind of the issue that we had with a lot of our reviewers in some of the earlier things that we used with Open Roads Navigator and ORD itself, was that it wasn't as easy for people to get in, understand the information, and provide comments back. Whereas with the GIS tool, really the only hurdle we have to get across is getting them login information and getting them access. Once they have access, we've heard a lot of feedback that it's extremely easy for them to get in, make a comment. It's 3 steps. And then for our team, it's really easy to get in and extract those comments. And we've been able to even just write a program that will also extract the station and offset to the closest alignment so that we can very easily relate it back. So I would say right now I'm leaning towards GIS. I'm very excited to try the iTwin review with the second phase of our project, and time will tell.
Gordon Grant, what did you guys use for model review?
I can answer first. We didn't really have anything like iTwins available to us at the time. So we had to use the native files, and what we were doing was over the shoulder reviews basically. And Turnpike actually had their GEC helping with that, and that turned out to be another lesson learned, because it really wasn't fair to these folks who were super smart modelers, nationally recognized folks, but they didn't know the project. So you're asking, folks, hey, go over to ramp whatever, or go to station so and so, and they didn't know what to do. So we moved forward. Over the shoulder reviews can still be very helpful, but the designer and engineer record should be the one leading those that know the project. But yeah, everything was native file.
Okay, Grant?
Yeah, we had a similar experience. So yeah, back in 2017, 2018, there really wasn't a lot of tools that we could use. As I mentioned, we had a 2D set of plans as well, kind of, back burner. I mentioned that the original plan for this model was for information only, so we had developed that set of plans. So, we went through the 2D set of plans and did a traditional highlight, just going through the model step by step, element by element, information, piece by information, and just made sure everything correlated with what we had on the plans, and that there wasn't any additional information that we didn't want or that was inaccurate. That, there were some things that weren't accurate that we found due to software limitations. But again, I mentioned that we used a special provision, and we really tried to go through and identify those things in that special provision.
Well, thank you, guys. You know what? Let's move on to another set of questions. Let's talk about technology-related questions. So it sounds like there's going to be a varying number of software uses. Nicole, you've probably seen SS4 and ORD. Tyler's used Civil 3D. I'm assuming, Grant, you used OBM V8i, and then Gordon, probably SS4, I don't know. But what are some of the pain points you've had to work through on your software, and what do you think that anything different today if you didn't use that type of software? And so, being that this is a little bit different, Tyler, why don't we start with you?
Sounds great. Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that we work through with Civil 3D is a lot of our industry here locally is used to seeing, open roads and files out of MicroStation. So a lot of our focus was how can we take and use that tool and yet make it essentially look the same or something similar, so when it goes to the end user, they're not seeing a bunch of different things. So there were some limitations there between, model development standards and what were there, and how we developed that state kit to make those look the same. The two softwares are just completely different, but overall, I think that we were able to work through those and get something that's pretty close. One of the things that we dealt with probably more often than we'd liked is just the loss of data. And I haven't worked on a digital delivery project using ORD, but I've had employees that have, and I understand that's something that happens, unfortunately, more often than not, just based upon the type of work it is. But corrupt files, lost files, there's some rework that's associated when your entire design is encapsulated in that one file, and when there's something wrong, there's some rework associated with that. So not a good solution there, other than to archive and save and all those types of things. But just maybe we talk about, some of the differences when it comes to models legal document. That's something that's I think more critical when it comes to when everything's in that file. I talked a lot about BIM 360 on this project because it was, like I mentioned earlier, we went all in on it. One of the struggles that we had was the designs and what they look like inside Civil 3D really looked like what they needed to look like when it come to the standards. But when you open it in the viewer with inside BIM 360, things just looked different. So there was a lot of frustration from the designers, and they're proud of their product and they were able to kind of deliver it, yet when it went to the reviewers and the contractors and different things, it wasn't quite as refined as what everybody had hoped. So there's definitely some You know, some improvement, be it BIM 360 or other tools used in the future.
Grant, how about you? Did you end up using OBM V8i, or what was the software you used for your bridge project?
We did. And at the time, you know, it was a fairly new tool. So, you know, I think the biggest surprise or challenge that we found was just, you know, we ran into a lot of bugs. However, I will say that, you know, the bridge that we decided to model was a lot more complicated than your traditional bridge. So, you know, we were really pushing the boundaries for them, and kudos to Bentley. They had a support team for us. They had a number of folks that helped us address those bugs or issues, you know, that not necessarily bugs that we ran across to, you know, they helped us adapt our workflow to, you know, ultimately deliver the project as a legal document. I will say, you know, as a plug for Advantages, you know, over the past 5 years or 4 years, you know, it's really advanced. It's come a long ways, especially in terms of the parametric modeling tools. So the ability to model a detailed bridge is much easier, much quicker, and really a lot more intuitive than it was 5 or 6 years ago. So the software is definitely advancing rapidly in this area.
Is that the OBM ORD, or I'm not quite sure how to characterize that?
Yep, it's so,
Go ahead.
you know, now it's Open Bridge Designer, which kind of encompasses a couple of different, you know, design, Open Bridge Modeler, Pro Structures. They're starting to incorporate some of those tools into Open Bridge Designer. So it's really pulling in a lot of different tools, you know, where we had Pro Structures was a, you know, really our detailing software. They're starting to pull a lot of that information or capabilities into Open Bridge Designer, which is a lot more user-friendly.
Thanks, Grant. Gordon, how about you? Did you use ORD, SS4, SS2?
So for Polk Parkway, that was SS4, but for our current one, it's ORD. So it's been interesting, kind of comparing and contrasting, and it kind of feels like, you know, moving from SS4 to ORD, you take a step forward in some ways, step back in others. You know, ORD is definitely faster and more stable, but plans production is makes you scratch your head sometimes with some of the things that it does, but they're working through those issues. So hopefully that gets better. You know, ORD using the DGN as the intelligent file is nice until, of course, it gets corrupted. But, you know, we mitigate that the same way we always have, really, by backing up our files and keeping our files federated. You know, those sort of standard practices still apply. And then ORD, there's been limitations introduced into some of the aspects of template design, which are odd and are kind of hard to figure out why they're there. But so, you know, we're kind of working around those. So anyway, there's definitely been it's been interesting going from one to the other and seeing how the one it's got its advantages and the other has its own.
Thanks, Gordon. Nicole, you want to talk a little bit about, I guess, the different softwares that you've seen and some of the pain points and some of the stuff that it's doing well today?
Sure. So I've kind of seen the barrage of different softwares. We started out in SS4 and then transitioned to ORD. We also use OpenRoads Navigator, which is no longer being updated by Bentley or supported by Bentley. And so some of the challenges in that is that we felt a little bit like beta testers for the initial ORD releases and got to provide a lot of feedback in our processes as we went through each of the projects. And in return for providing that feedback, I would say that it's a lot more stable now, the ORD platform. As far as the OpenRoads Navigator goes, it was a really good tool. We were utilizing it both for review as well as in the construction fields. And it was a little bit sad to see that go. I know it's being replaced by iTwin, so I'm really excited to see what that brings. But from an ORD standpoint, I'm very pleased with the amount of progress that they've made with a lot of our feedback. There's still some things that we struggle with, profiles, SUDA specifically. has still continued to be a struggle, and we continue to work through issues. Some of the parametric constraints have gotten better. Some of the translations by using FME into GIS that we're using for our review tool don't come through. We can't use dynamic labeling. Some of the elements drop and are unusable. And so there's just some things we're working through still, some challenges and some wins on all of those sides. But I would say overall, we're pretty pleased with the amount of progress we've been able to make through ORD and the feedback we've provided.
All right, thanks, you guys. Elect.
All right. Well, we'll move on to the next set of questions. And, you know, as we introduce new technology, you know, we always have to think about workforce development and equity related type issues, because we want to make sure we bring everybody along and that we're supporting all of the teams involved in the project. So how prepared was your project team to jump into the software and produce the models? You know, did you have all the competencies already built, or did you have some and then you had to build others? So let's start with you, Gordon.
Yeah, so I'll kind of talk about both, but mainly Polk Parkway, because that's one we took all the way through. I feel like we were as ready as anyone could have been. We had embraced 3D modeling as soon as you know, it was a thing. So we had several folks that were good at it and had a passion for it. I feel like, you know, had more experience than most. So we felt good about that. We did lean on FDOT central office quite a bit for our Polk Parkway project for modeling, but also for a lot of that next gen plan stuff. And they were extremely helpful all the way through. We didn't really deal with Bentley a whole lot on that one. I'm sure Vern was, because he does regularly anyway. So I think a lot of that was happening on his end and not so much on our end. Now on our current one, we definitely have a lot more direct interaction with Bentley and continue with central office. But that has a lot more to do with the iTwins digital design review that we're piloting as well, because there's definitely some things not quite working like they're supposed to, and a lot of it, you know, this is all going on our system. So anyway, there's a lot of direct interaction with Bentley on that one, and they've been great. We're working through it.
All right. So that's great from a roadway perspective. Grant, what was your take for bridge modeling? You know, we've been modeling roadway earthwork for a long time, but not other disciplines.
Yeah, so we had some experience going into this project. We had spent a little time modeling some existing bridges just to get familiar with the software. You know, at the time, again, back in, you know, 2017, 2018 timeline, there wasn't nearly as many resources out there for training. So we brought a couple of Bentley representatives into our office to do a day-long training on Open Bridge Modeler and ProStructures. You know, when you look at it today, you know, with everything now being virtual and all the training, the free training especially, you know, Bentley, I know they host, you know, like the Ask Alex series and other things like that. And I'm sure other platforms do similar type training sessions. But, you know, I don't think it takes a lot to get up to speed. You know, it's not overly complicated to learn the software. And, you know, if you spend, you know, a couple hours over the lunch period, you know, over a week or two, just watching some videos, I think you can get up to speed, and then really just getting into it and getting a feel for the software is the best way forward.
Thank you. Any other thoughts, Tyler, Nicole?
Yeah, I like what Grant just said, and you said it earlier as well, as Lex. I mean, we've been designing using this software for a long time, so our abilities to jump in and use the software and design a project, I think we've likely all felt comfortable with. What's been a little bit different is using that as a legal document and that refinement. So that we felt confident as we went in. What our biggest hurdle was as we got into it is really making sure that those standards that as it transitioned from, you know, design file into a file that is used by the contractor, that it wasn't just a dumb 3D break line, but it actually had the attributes and data elements associated to it, so it could actually be used by you know, field crews and contractors in the field. So that was a learning curve, and like I mentioned before, Autodesk had a dedicated team, and they were a great team partner in helping the overall project through that process.
Alexa, I would say that one of the bigger learning curves wasn't necessarily from the roadway team. I agree with both Tyler and Gordon on the fact that we've been modeling for years. And so from a modeling standpoint on roadway, it wasn't that big of a jump or hurdle. It was our ATMS designer, our signal designer, our drainage and utility designers that I think had a little bit of a different experience because they were modeling a lot further than they normally had experience in their past projects or with a traditional project. For example, on some of our projects, we're modeling out all of our existing utilities and all of our new utilities and our storm drain in a 3D space for the clash detection purposes, not necessarily because that's what the contractor needs. And so getting them to make sure that they accounted for that in their scoping and in their deliverable timeline was a little bit of a learning curve, and just getting them all up to speed with what we're delivering and how that's so different from what they have in the past. And so just something to keep in mind as you get into your first digital delivery project, that those are, I think, a little bit more of the skills that our folks needed help with.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it back to George.
So we do have a question in the chat, but if we have some time, we'll go over. We've only got about 5 minutes left. And I think at this stage, what we'd like to do is let's move and ask the panelists if they would just give any advice or what you would tell your peers that are listening today that are starting on their first Models Legal Document project. Gordon, you want to start us out?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I circled some of these questions internally, and one person gave me the feedback, just one simple statement, good luck, but it's not all that bad. It really is fun. So serious advice would be expect to spend some time and money to flatten that learning curve. If you do have a learning curve, expect to do that. Allow for more review time, space it out incrementally, and keep open lines of communication with your client so the expectations remain clear. That one's really important.
Great, thanks, Gordon. Grant?
Yeah, I'd just say, you know, get a good understanding of the software you intend to use. Don't jump into it blind. You know, one of the best ways you could do that is just take a current project that you may have, you know, and develop the model, you know, even though it's not part of the scope of work. You know, it doesn't take a lot. I mentioned the parametric modeling tools are there. Just get into the software. That'll allow you to create a more clear and concise scope of work when you come to that point, and really have a better understanding of the level of effort on your end.
Great, thanks, Grant. Tyler?
Yeah, I'd suggest to just encourage everybody to get involved now. I think that we can all look at where our industry's going, and I think we can all see that it's going that direction. So I would just encourage everybody to find the opportunity to get involved in one way or another. You know, it could just be baby steps where you're not taking a full project, that but just take parts of it, and even if it's not the legal document, find ways to train your engineers and your technicians to have that experience. It is going to require some capital to do that, but I think as we look internally at where things are going, we realize the importance of making that a priority, and are realizing the success of it.
So Tyler, before we pivot into Cole, just because yours is unique, at least from a UDOT perspective with Civil 3D, you've done both Civil 3D and Bentley projects.
Correct.
Do you see as a consultant difference there? I mean, is it, if you were gonna, again, for the peers that are listening and wondering about that, does it matter which software you use to deliver?
To be honest with you, they're different. Can I take a designer and take them from one side to the other? Not so much. If you purely look at the model development standards and the level of delivery or development, it's the same, but they are different. It's hard to take an ORD engineer and put them on Civil 3D without some learning curve.
All right, thanks, Tyler. Nicole?
Yeah, I think the other panelists really covered a lot of what I would say. I think that the biggest thing is just to remember that this isn't the first time that our engineering community has made a jump. We made a jump when we went from having a table that we drew everything out on to going to software in the first place, to going to PDFs for our plan sets instead of printing them off. I mean, we continue to make jumps and leaps forward, and this is the next leap forward for us. And I think that we just need to embrace the change, which is really hard for us engineers. But I do think that if we can embrace it and try to look at the positive and realize the benefits that we're getting out of this, then it makes it a lot easier to take that leap of faith and try something new. And I know that it's once our contractors get that information, a lot of them say that it's really hard to go back to not having that information at their fingertips. And so once your contracting community gets on board as well, it makes all of it that much easier to continue moving forward. So just don't be scared, try something new, and just like to second everything that all of the other panelists said as well.
Well, I would like to thank all of our panelists and Alexa for helping me facilitate this. I think one of the things that's interesting to me is not just these panelists, but others that I've talked to. Well, it is something that probably brings up anxiety because you haven't done it before. It tends to work out pretty well. So I would encourage everyone not to be nervous about it, but to jump in and know that there's a lot of support behind. With that, we're going to turn it over to Matt Reifer to kind of wrap it up. Matt?
Great, thanks, George. And let me also express my thanks to our panelists from ACEC member firms that joined us today. Thanks for sharing your expertise. On behalf of our organization, I also want to thank all the organizers and the program planners for this session and future sessions. I'm a lobbyist and a lawyer. I work in the advocacy department for ACEC. This technical stuff makes my head spin. I read the articles. I watch the webinars. I'm in awe of the work that you all are doing in this space. I'm committed, and the organization is committed to being a partner and a conduit for information. We push these things out to our members, promote participation in these things. If we can go to the next slide. I want to make sure everybody here continues to stay engaged and get your colleagues and partners engaged as well. The sponsor organizations have a number of upcoming events planned. You can see the topics there, building on the themes that were expressed today and doing an even deeper dive into some more technical issues coming up. So keep an eye out for that registration information for those future upcoming events. Really encourage you to stay engaged on this. As Nicole said, this is the future. This is where we're all going, and we need to collaborate and work together on that. Next slide. Again, I want to thank our partners, particularly the Highway Engineering Exchange Program. You can see, make sure to visit their website and get involved in what they're doing. Next slide. As well as Building Smart, the USA chapter and the international arm. They've been very gracious and collaborative with ACEC particularly. I know a number of our members are active and engaged in what Ian and his colleagues are doing. So keep an eye out for more information from Building Smart USA and get involved in what they're doing. Thanks for their participation here today. Next slide. And TRB. These are, this is where a lot of the real technical work happens and the coordination across disciplines and practices. So you can see all the different subcommittee activities and groups there. Really encourage you to get involved there and lend your expertise to the development of these standards. Keep going. Next slide. And that's it. Let me again say on behalf of ACEC and our member firms, we just really strongly appreciate the collaboration across all the different groups, particularly the AASHTO Joint Technical Committee on Electronic Engineering Standards, as well as TRB, HEEP, and Building Smart. The public-private partnership and all of us working together to figure these things out and promote successful outcomes is absolutely critical. We've got a great platform, good integration, good collaboration, and we're very, very much appreciative of that and committed to keeping it going forward. So thanks everybody for your participation. And with that, I think that is the end of our program for today. And unless somebody else has any other closing remarks, George.
Matt, I was going to say thank you very much. We appreciate it. And that does end it for today. A couple of last minute things. The PDHs will be available. I think we either send them out or they're available in Eventbrite. And I also believe that what we're going to have is a survey. Be very quick. What we just want to make sure is that these are informative and that the setup is right. And so if you guys could fill out that survey that comes with Eventbrite, that would be great. Other than that, have a great day and thanks for tuning in today. Bye-bye.